Welcome back, y'all. It is Sunday, March 29th, 2026, and we left off mid Mark 14, so that's where we're going to pick it up right here at verse 43. Excuse me. And immediately while he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a crowd with swords and clubs, from the chief priest and the scribes and the elders. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. Seize him and lead him away under guard." And when he came, he went up to him at once and said, "Rabbi," and he kissed him. And they laid hands on him and seized him. But one of those who stood by drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. And Jesus said to them, "Have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I was with you in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me. But let the scriptures be fulfilled." And they all left him and fled. So I wonder, I have a question. If Matthew is based on the Gospel of Mark, why does Matthew contain the comment from Jesus instructing Peter not to attack, but Mark does not? But they both share Jesus' other words. Because in Matthew, as we read, Jesus tells Peter that those that use the sword will die by the sword, or something to that effect, but it's not present here at all in Mark. If Matthew used Mark as a primary source, a theory known as Markan priority, you'd expect them to be nearly identical, but the sword scene in Gethsemane is a perfect example of how the gospel writers weren't just copyists. They were editors with specific theological goals. In Mark 14:47, an unnamed bystander cuts off the ear of the high priest's servant, and Jesus says nothing to stop the violence. In Matthew, however, Jesus delivers the famous line, "Put your sword back in its place, for all who draw the sword will die by the sword." Here's why Matthew likely included this while Mark did not. The new Moses and teacher persona. Matthew portrays Jesus as the supreme teacher and a new Moses, giving a new law, while Mark's Jesus is a man of action who often suffers in silence. Matthew's Jesus uses every moment, even his arrest, as a teaching opportunity. By adding the command to Peter, whom Matthew identifies by context, though he remains unnamed in the text here, Jesus reinforces the ethics of the Sermon on the Mount, turning the other cheek. Okay. Demonstrating divine control, Matthew is very concerned with showing that Jesus is in total control of his destiny. By adding the comment about 12 legions of angels, Matthew makes it clear that Jesus isn't being caught. He is surrendering voluntarily to fulfill Scripture. Mark's focus, the raw abandonment and mystery of the Passion. Matthew's focus, the deliberate fulfillment of prophecy. What is meant when by the Passion? In a theological and historical context, the Passion, where'd it go? The Passion refers specifically to the final period of Jesus' life, covering his suffering and the events leading up to his death on the cross. The word doesn't mean passion in the modern sense of intense enthusiasm or romance. Instead, it comes from the Latin word passio, which means suffering or enduring. I see. Okay. All right, so verse 51. Or no, sorry. Verse 50. And they all left him and fled. So all the disciples that were with him left him and fled like he said that they would. Verse 51. And a young man followed him with nothing but a linen cloth about his body. And they seized him, but he left the linen cloth and ran away naked. I've asked about this before, but I'm going to ask about it again because I'm curious. Explain the point of the mention of the man running away naked in Mark 14:51 to 52. The account of the young man fleeing naked during Jesus' arrest is one of the most curious and debated details in the Gospel of Mark. While it might seem like a bizarre extra, scholars generally point to three main reasons for its inclusion. The first, the author's signature. The most popular historical theory is that the young man was Mark himself. Since this detail appears only in the Gospel of Mark and nowhere else, many believe the author was including a subtle, humble signature in the narrative, much like a painter might include themselves in the background of a crowd scene, emphasizing total abandonment. Theologically, the scene serves to heighten the sense of isolation surrounding Jesus. Earlier in the chapter, the disciples promised to stay by his side. Verse 50 states, and they all left him and fled. The mention of the young man losing his clothes emphasizes the desperation and haste of those fleeing. He would rather run away in total shame and nakedness than stay with Jesus. It shows that the abandonment was complete. A literary link to the resurrection. Some scholars see a symbolic bookend here. In Mark 14:51, a young man wearing a linen cloth flees the scene of the arrest. In Mark 16:5, a young man wearing a white robe is found at the empty tomb. Okay. This creates a narrative arc. At the moment of Jesus' defeat and death, the young man, representing the disciples or humanity, flees in shame and nakedness. At the moment of the resurrection, the young man is restored and clothed in white, symbolizing the transformation from the shame of the garden to the glory of the tomb. All right, verse 53. And they led Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests and the elders and the scribes came together. And Peter had followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. And he was sitting with the guards and warming himself at the fire. Now the chief priest and the whole council were seeking testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. For many bore false witness against him, but their testimony did not agree. And some stood up and bore false witness against him, saying, We heard him say, I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another, not made with hands. Yet even about this their testimony did not agree. And the high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you? But he remained silent and made no answer. Again the high priest asked him, Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said, I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. So I have another question. That's very different from what Matthew says too. In Matthew, Jesus says, You have said it. That's his answer to the high priest. And it's more of a passive answer saying, Your words, not mine. But here he directly claims it. So I'm going to ask about that. Why in Mark 14:62 is Jesus' response, more authoritative and direct in his claim, whereas the response in Matthew is more passive. The difference between I am in Mark and you have said so in Matthew is one of the most famous points of comparison in gospel studies. The variation isn't just a random shift in wording, it reflects the specific theological personality and audience of each author. Here's a breakdown of why these responses feel so different. Mark's lion-like immediacy. Mark is the shortest and most action-oriented gospel. His narrative style is blunt and urgent. That's true, it has seemed a lot shorter. Throughout the book, there is a recurring theme called the Messianic secret, where Jesus tells people not to reveal who he is. In Mark 14:62, that secret finally explodes by having Jesus say, I am. Mark provides theological peak. After chapters of silence, this is the grand reveal. A direct link to Exodus from the Old Testament. The Greek ego, I am, echoes the way God identified himself to Moses. Yeah, that's cool. Clarity for Gentiles. Mark was likely writing for a Roman Gentile audience who might not have understood subtle Jewish idioms, so he used the most direct claim possible. I see. That makes sense. Matthew's Jewish legalism. Matthew was writing primarily for a Jewish audience. In Matthew 26:64, Jesus responds with, Su ipas, you have said so, or the words are yours. While it sounds passive or evasive to modern ears, it carried a specific weight in a first century Jewish context. The agreement idiom. Scholars note that this phrase is essentially a way of saying, you've said it yourself, and it is true, but I'm not going to give you the satisfaction of a confession on your terms. Okay. It's a way of forcing the accuser to own their own words. Subverting the trial. By saying, you have said so, Jesus refuses to acknowledge the high priest's authority to judge him. He isn't being passive, he's being subversive. Okay. Fulfillment of prophecy. Matthew immediately follows this with the reference to the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power, which is where the real authority in his response lies. Okay. Verse 63. And the high priest tore his garments and said, what further witnesses do we need? You have heard his blasphemy. What is your decision? And they all condemned him as deserving death. And some began to spit on him and to cover his face and to strike him, saying to him, prophesy. And the guards received him with blows. That's crazy. Verse 66. And as Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came, and seeing Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, you also were with the Nazarene, Jesus. But he denied it, saying, I neither know nor understand what you mean. And he went out into the gateway, and the rooster crowed. And the servant girl saw him and began again to say to the bystanders, this man is one of them. But again he denied it. And after a little while the bystanders again said to Peter, certainly you are one of them, for you are a Galilean. But he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, I do not know this man of whom you speak. And immediately the rooster crowed a second time. And Peter remembered how Jesus had said to him, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And he broke down and wept. Mark 15. And as soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council. And they bound Jesus and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate. And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered him, "You have said so." And the chief priest accused him of many things. And Pilate again asked him, "Have you no answer to make? See how many charges they bring against you." But Jesus made no further answer, so that Pilate was amazed. Now at the feast he used to release for them one prisoner for whom they asked. And among the rebels in prison, who had committed murder in the insurrection, there was a man called Barabbas. And the crowd came up and began to ask Pilate to do as he usually did for them. And he answered them, saying, "Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" For he perceived that it was out of envy that the chief priest had delivered him up. But the chief priest stirred up the crowd to have him release for them Barabbas instead. And Pilate again said to them, "Then what shall I do with the man you call the king of the Jews?" And they cried out again, "Crucify him." And Pilate said to them, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him." So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. And the soldiers led him away inside the palace, that is, the governor's headquarters. And they called together the whole battalion, and they clothed him in a purple cloak, and twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on him, and they began to salute him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they were striking his head with a reed, and spitting on him, and kneeling down in homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the purple cloak, and put his own clothes on him, and they led him out to crucify him. And they compelled a passerby, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to carry his cross. And they brought him to the place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull. And they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him and divided his garments among them, casting lots for them to decide what each should take. And it was the third hour when they crucified him, and the inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." And with him they crucified two robbers, one on his right and one on his left. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads, saying, "Aha, you who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." So also the chief priests with the scribes mocked him to one another, saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe." Those who were crucified with him also reviled him. And when the 6th hour had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour Jesus cried with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And some of the bystanders hearing it said, "Behold, he is calling Elijah." And someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a reed, and gave it to him to drink, saying, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down." And Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two, from top to bottom. And when the centurion, who stood facing him, saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, "Truly this man was the Son of God." There were also women looking on from a distance, among whom were Mary Magdalene, and Mary the mother of James the younger, and of Joses and Salome. When he was in Galilee, they followed him and ministered to him, and there were also many other women who came up with him to Jerusalem. And when evening had come, Since it was the day of preparation, that is, the day before the Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea, a respected member of the council, who was also himself looking for the kingdom of God, took courage and went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Pilate was surprised to hear that he should have already died, and summoning the centurion, he asked him whether he was already dead. And when he learned from the centurion that he was dead, he granted the corpse to Joseph. And Joseph bought a linen shroud, and taking him down, wrapped him in the linen shroud, and laid him in a tomb that had been cut out of rock. And he rolled the stone against the entrance of the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where he was laid. So, question here is, in Mark 15:44, why is Pilate surprised that Jesus is already dead? In Mark 15:44, Pilate's surprise stems from the fact that Jesus died much faster than was typical for a victim of crucifixion. To understand his reaction, we have to look at the physiological nature of the punishment and the specific timing of the events. Crucifixion was designed to be a slow, agonizing death by exhaustion and asphyxiation. It's hard to say. It was common for victims to survive on the cross for 2 or 3 days, really? Wow. Because the body was suspended in a way that made breathing difficult. The victim had to push up on their wounded feet to exhale. Death usually occurred only when the person reached total physical collapse. Since Jesus had been on the cross for only about 6 hours, from the 3rd hour to the 9th hour, or roughly from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., Pilate's skepticism was medically and historically justified. While the text doesn't explicitly state this as Pilate's reasoning, historians often point to the Roman scourging Jesus underwent before the crucifixion. Jesus was beaten so severely that he was unable to carry his own crossbar. This intense physical trauma, leading to a hypovolemic shock, meaning significant blood loss, likely accelerated his death compared to other prisoners. Pilate's surprise was significant enough that he refused to release the body to Joseph of Arimathea until he received official confirmation. Yeah, okay. All right, Mark 16. When the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early, on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. And they were saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb?" And looking up, they saw that the stone had been rolled back. It was very large. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, dressed in a white robe, and they were alarmed. And he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where he laid. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. So this is interesting because also in Matthew, it's very explicit about the fact that it's an angel that came down and rolled that big tomb away, and that the angel was Like its skin was like lightning and its robes were as white as snow. And then here it's just saying it's a young man. And it also mentions the Roman guards. They were terrified. Like the Roman guards saw the angel as well, and they were terrified, and they fell down. And they were basically paralyzed in fear. But here it makes no mention of him. So let's ask about that. Why in Mark 16 is there no mention of the angel as there is in Matthew? It's a common misconception that Mark 16 excludes the figure found in Matthew's account. In reality, both Gospels describe a supernatural messenger at the tomb. They use a different terminology and focus on different details of the encounter. Here's a breakdown of how the two accounts compare and why they might differ. While Matthew uses the specific word angel, Mark describes the figure as a young man. Despite the different labels, the context and description suggest they are describing the same entity. Yeah, it's just very different. Like, yeah, here in Matthew, appearance like lightning, clothing white as snow, wearing a white robe. So I guess Mark was just very pragmatic. He didn't feel the need to mention the part about appearance like lightning. Descended from heaven, rolled back the stone and sat on it, sitting on the right side inside the tomb. Yeah, there's a few differences. Why the difference in description? There are several theological and literary reasons why Mark might have chosen the term young man over angel. The humble perspective. Mark's gospel is often characterized by its direct, punchy, and earthy style, describing the figure as he appeared to the women, a man in white, rather than his ontological status, an angel, fits Mark's narrative realism. The young man motif. Some scholars point to a literary bookend in Mark. In Mark 14:51-52, a young man in a linen cloth flees naked during Jesus' arrest, a sign of shame and defeat. In Mark 16, a young man in a white robe announces the victory of the resurrection. This creates a symbolic transition from the failure of the disciples to the glory of the risen Christ. Jewish literary tradition. In the Second Temple period, it was common for angels to be described simply as men in white, similar to descriptions in the book of Daniel. Mark's audience would have immediately understood a man in a white robe sitting in a sealed tomb to be a divine messenger. Okay. The variation isn't an omission of the supernatural, but rather a different stylistic choice in how that supernatural presence is reported. Okay. All right, verse 6. And he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples." Pardon me. "But go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." And they went out and fled from the tomb. For trembling and astonishment had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Now when he rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons. She went and told those who had been with him, as they mourned and wept. But when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they would not believe it. After these things he appeared in another form to 2 of them, as they were walking into the country. And they went back and told the rest, but they did not believe them. Afterward he appeared to the 11 themselves, as they were reclining at table, and he rebuked them for their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they had not believed those who saw him after he had risen. And he said to them, Go into all the world and proclaim the gospel to the whole creation. Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved, but whoever does not believe will be condemned. And these signs will accompany those who believe. In my name they will cast out demons, they will speak in new tongues, they will pick up serpents with their hands, and if they drink any deadly poison, it will not hurt them. They will lay their hands on the sick, and they will recover. So then the Lord Jesus, after he had spoken to them, was taken up into heaven and sat down at the right hand of God. And they went out and preached everywhere, while the Lord worked with them and confirmed the message by accompanying signs. All right, perfect timing there. That's the end of Mark. And that's our 30-minute mark. So we'll end it there for tonight. We'll pick it up with the Gospel of Luke tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in. God bless and good night.